Hello, readers. This is Justin's 52 Books, where I discuss my selections for the 52 Book Club's 2022 Reading Challenge. This is week 19, and I'm talking about Prompt 22, a book with an unlikely detective. The book in question is The Undercover Economist, exposing why the rich are rich, the poor are poor, and why you can never buy a decent used car. Ha 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 ha. By Tim Harford and written in 2006. It's an economics book dressed up as plain speech, real-world examples of behavior. And for what it is, it's not that bad. At the beginning, Harford brings up establishing theories behind economics laid down long ago by people like David Ricardo, and makes connections between theories from that time and outcomes of today, particularly one about pasture-land and Starbucks chains now. He makes the point that, on page 13, economics is partly about modeling, about articulating basic principles and patterns that operate behind seemingly complex subjects like the rent on farms or coffee bars. But whenever the discussion of topics of the day turns to economics or political science or any squishy soft science that claims to have a line on human behavior, I think of the old lines from Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. Here on page 105. He tried to read an elementary economics text. It bored him past endurance. It was like listening to somebody interminably recounting a long and stupid dream. He could not force himself to understand how banks functioned and so forth, because all the operations of capitalism were as meaningless to him as the rites of a primitive religion, as barbaric, as elaborate, and as unnecessary. In a human sacrifice to deity, there might at least be a mistaken and terrible beauty. In the rites of the money changers, where greed, laziness, and envy were assumed to move all of men's acts, even the terrible became banal. Burn. Ursula Le Guin was so good at the burn. But that's not to say that I agree with everything that Le Guin is putting down here. I certainly have a bank account, I have a job, and I plan to retire someday. I have to operate in a capitalistic system. But it's just helpful for me to remember those lines and this book whenever books like The Undercover Economist show up and I engage with them. Because it's examples and metaphors that it uses. It needs those to make and create its own logical consistency and therefore be above questioning. All soft science does this. It's not just economists or Tim Harford or economics in it by itself. All soft science has that aspect where here's the truth and we make these assumptions based on that. And it's not just contrarianism that makes me point it out, but I think it's important to be clear. You can draw all kinds of lines of logic from that. You can say this has that reaction and thus we have such and such an outcome. You can codify all the complexity you want, but once you do, you require certainty. And that will always be my complaint about any book like this. It's that certainty in theory, but it depends in practice aspect. Certainty certainly feels good, but it automatically puts up my shields, and I think it does for most people. And this is where actually The Undercover Economist actually has a leg up on an average econ book, as at least it's using real-world, tangible examples. Also, the points it makes are at least trying to rise above the idea of money as a scorekeeper for value, and that's important. Money as value is certainly here, and I don't really necessarily have a problem with that in and of itself. But so are discussions about and confrontations on ethical problems revolving around price targeting, tiered prices, externality charges, particularly when it comes to noise and congestion and pollution in regards to traffic in our cities. And then also immigration and education. And a word about those two. Immigration. As I say this, it's May 2022, and it's hard to find workers. It's hard to find staff, and that's driving up wages. That's pushing inflation. Things like gas prices are getting high, for many other reasons, but like war in Ukraine. But no, it's being felt. And many people have a reason for why it's hard to find staff. COVID sent all the people to the wind. We gave out a bunch of stimulus. The government gave out a bunch of stimulus before COVID so that people could get by. Thus, people didn't have to work, or they don't have to work now because they got some cash 2 years ago. Hey, we're in the middle of the baby boom retirement. Couldn't see that one coming. And then there's also some people who just say, oh, people don't want to work nowadays. I have an issue with any sentence that has the word nowadays in it. But I got to point out, none of that addresses the idea that we have had tight as hell restrictions on immigration in this country for a long time. And hey, I get why. That would argue to me that we need some immigration reform to get some people here to help do the jobs and get paid and living wages, and thus partake it in our lives and livelihoods and country. Why is immigration not being talked about? Harford talks about it. And I particularly like what Harford has to say about education and how it doesn't necessarily work in a market economy. And that says more about me and my biases when it comes to public education. But it's encouraging to hear people like Harford make the case that spending a lot of money to put your own kid in the best school really just raises the cost or value, whichever you want. I don't care which way you look at it. It really just raises the value or cost of the housing around that school. And it doesn't necessarily mean better education for your kid, and definitely not for all kids, which we kind of need, doctors and mechanics and nurses and an educated population. And it makes the point that if you want better education, better just give schools more money, all of them, all around. And those are really the major points I got out of the book. Slight side point at this point, it's written in 2006 and it is a little dated. I wish I'd realized kind of how dated it actually was, but I kind of lost track on that when I started reading it. And it's evident in weird ways. It talks about Amazon having a stock price of $40, and that's something to think about because it's huge now. But I guess in all, the topics discussed don't date the book too badly, at least for a pre-COVID book. Yes, at the end of the day, I actually really did like The Undercover Economist, particularly this bit. We should aim to make ours a world where people feel free to do things they enjoy, even if others are mildly inconvenienced, but also one where we refrain from harming other people if the effort involved to avoid harming them is small. That sounds good. I could use more of that. I think we all could use more of that. Thanks for watching me talk about my thoughts on The Undercover Economist by Tim Harford. This has been week 19 of Justin's 52 Books, and I was discussing my thoughts on Prompt 22, a book with an unlikely detective. For more information on the prompts of the 52 Book Club, you can check them out on their website, the52bookclub.com. You can also check them out on Goodreads and Facebook. You can also check me out on Goodreads and Storygraph at Justin's 52 Books. I hope to see you next week for Prompt 41, a book that involves a second chance. And it's a science fiction classic. I love it. Till then, happy reading.